Oh, you really don't see it, do you? That's the funniest part. Not the whispers, not the stares, not even the way people suddenly go quiet when you walk in. No, the real joke is that you have no idea what you are. They do, though. They notice the way you carry yourself, like you don't need validation, like the world's approval is some cheap little trick you stopped falling for a long time ago. They see that glow, not the kind you fake for attention, the kind that happens when someone's finally comfortable in their own chaos. And it bothers them, because while they're out there begging to be seen, you're over here being unforgettable without even trying. While they're building masks, you're walking around raw.
Real dangerous.
Beautiful? Oh, it's more than that. It's threatening. You don't just turn heads, you make people question themselves. You make them wonder why they feel so small standing next to someone who isn't even trying to shine. And that drives them insane. Because the truth is, the thing they envy the most is the very thing you've been overlooking this whole time. So go ahead, keep doubting yourself. It just makes the punchline hit harder when you finally realize you were the masterpiece in a world full of cheap imitations. There's something about you that shifts the air the moment you enter a space. And the strangest part is, you don't even notice it. You're not trying to be seen, not forcing attention, not playing the exhausting game of proving your worth, yet somehow everything bends slightly in your direction. People pause mid-conversation, eyes linger a second too long, energy subtly rearranges itself around you. It's not loud, not obvious, not something you can point at and say, there it is. It's felt. And that's what makes it powerful. Most people spend their entire lives chasing presence, crafting personas, rehearsing reactions, hoping to leave an impression. But your presence doesn't come from performance. It comes from something deeper, something unpolished and real. It's in the way you exist without asking for permission. The way you occupy space without apologizing for it. There's a quiet certainty in you, even if you don't consciously feel confident. It shows up in your body language, in your tone, in the way you don't rush to fill silence just to make others comfortable. That stillness, that restraint, it speaks louder than any words ever could. And people feel it, even if they don't understand it. Some are drawn in, almost magnetically, trying to figure you out, trying to get closer to whatever it is you carry so effortlessly. Others feel unsettled by it, because your presence exposes the gaps in theirs. It reminds them of how much they try, how much they perform, how much they depend on validation to feel whole. You become a mirror they didn't ask for, reflecting both admiration and insecurity at the same time. What makes it even more intense is that you're not seeking control, yet you influence the room anyway. That's rare. Most influence is loud, deliberate, and obvious. Yours is subtle, almost invisible, yet it leaves a stronger mark. You don't need to dominate conversations or demand attention. Your energy does the work for you. It lingers after you've left, in the thoughts people replay, in the curiosity they can't shake. They might not even remember exactly what you said, but they'll remember how they felt around you. And that feeling stays. There's also a certain unpredictability in your presence, a sense that you're not easily defined or placed into a category. People like things they can label, things they can understand and control. But you don't give them that comfort. You exist outside their expectations, and that makes you intriguing and a little intimidating. They don't know what you'll say next, how you'll react, or what you're really thinking. And that mystery pulls them in while keeping them slightly on edge. And here's the twist. You might be the last person to recognize any of this, because to you it just feels normal. It's just how you move, how you think, how you are. You don't see the contrast between your natural presence and everyone else's effort, so you assume there's nothing special about it. But that's exactly why it stands out so much. It's unforced, unfiltered, untouched by the need to impress. In a world where everyone is trying to be noticed, your presence doesn't chase attention. It attracts it, quietly, relentlessly, without asking. The difference is almost invisible at first glance, yet it changes everything. Effortless confidence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need to. It walks into a room like it was always meant to be there. Like nothing is being proven. Nothing is being defended. Nothing is being chased. It's strange, because the more someone tries to look confident, the more you can feel the effort behind it. The tension. The rehearsed posture. The forced calm. It leaks through every movement like a crack in a mask that refuses to stay perfect. Forced attention, on the other hand, is loud. It wants eyes. It needs reactions. It survives on validation the way fire survives on oxygen. Without it, it starts to fade, so it performs. It laughs a little too loudly. It speaks a little too quickly. It adjusts itself in real time, depending on who's watching. It becomes a version of itself that it believes will be accepted. And people might notice it, but they don't feel it. They register it, they observe it, but they don't remember it the same way. Effortless confidence doesn't chase reactions, yet reactions follow it anyway. That's the part that confuses people. Because they've been taught that value must be demonstrated, that worth must be proven through effort, through dominance, through noise. But then they meet someone who does none of that and still shifts the energy of the space without trying. That contradiction creates tension in their mind. They start to wonder what the trick is. What's being hidden? What's being done differently behind the scenes? But there is no trick. That's what unsettles them the most. Because forced attention is built on insecurity. It's built on the fear of being ignored, forgotten, overlooked. So it overcompensates. It stretches itself thin across every possible moment, trying to make sure it is seen. It becomes reactive instead of rooted. It depends on external signals to decide its own value. One day it feels high. The next day it collapses under silence. It's fragile even when it looks bold. Effortless confidence doesn't fluctuate like that. It doesn't rise and fall with applause. It doesn't reshape itself depending on the audience. It stays anchored. Not because it believes it's superior, but because it isn't negotiating its existence with the world. It's not asking, "Do you approve of me?" It's not waiting for permission to exist fully. It simply does. And people feel that difference instinctively. Some are drawn to it like they're trying to understand how it works. They mistake it for mystery, for charisma, for some hidden social strategy. They try to decode it, replicate it, imitate the posture, the tone, the silence between words. But they miss the source, because it was never in the performance. It was in the absence of performance. Others feel uncomfortable around it, not because it threatens them directly, but because it exposes them indirectly. When someone doesn't need attention, it quietly reveals how much others depend on it. When someone isn't trying to impress, it quietly highlights how often others are performing. That contrast stings without saying a word. And the irony, the cruel little joke hidden underneath all of it, is that the moment someone starts trying to be effortlessly confident, they've already stepped out of it, because effort enters the equation. Awareness turns into self-monitoring. Natural flow becomes controlled behavior. The mirror starts reflecting itself instead of the world around it. Meanwhile, the one who isn't trying continues to be. Not louder, not sharper, not more dramatic. Just steady in a way that doesn't ask to be noticed, yet somehow cannot be ignored. Lingering in rooms long after the conversation shifts, staying in people's thoughts without permission, resurfacing when least expected, like a presence that doesn't need to announce itself to remain felt. There's something unsettling about authenticity in a world full of carefully constructed versions of people. Real authenticity doesn't perform, it doesn't negotiate, it doesn't soften itself just to be easier to accept. It simply exists in its own shape, whether it fits in or not. And that is exactly why it becomes a threat to those who are still wearing masks without even realizing it. Because when someone shows up without the need to pretend, it forces everyone around them to silently measure how much of themselves is real and how much is adjusted for approval. Authenticity doesn't try to compete, yet it changes the entire atmosphere of comparison. In a room full of performances, the one person not performing becomes impossible to ignore. Not because they are louder, but because they are unfiltered. They don't adjust their personality depending on who is watching. They don't shift their values just to blend into the moment. There is a steadiness in them that doesn't flinch when opinions change. And that steadiness creates discomfort in people who rely on adaptation to feel safe. Most social environments are built on subtle agreements. Unspoken rules about what to say, how to react, what version of yourself is acceptable in that space. People learn to read the room and adjust accordingly. They become skilled at fitting in, at shaping themselves into whatever is required to avoid rejection. Over time, that becomes normal, so normal that they forget they are doing it. It becomes identity instead of strategy, and then someone walks in who doesn't play that game at all. That's where the friction begins. Because authenticity doesn't attack anyone directly, but it exposes the system everyone else is silently participating in. It reveals how much energy is spent maintaining image, how much effort goes into being liked, how carefully words are chosen not to disturb perception. And suddenly, what felt natural starts to feel artificial in comparison. Not because it changed, but because it was seen clearly for the first time. People don't always react to authenticity with admiration. Sometimes they react with resistance. They might call it too much, too blunt, too different, too intense. But those labels often come from discomfort, not truth. Because authenticity doesn't adjust itself to reduce tension. It doesn't dilute its edges just to make others comfortable. And when something refuses to bend, it naturally creates pressure in environments built on flexibility and performance. There's also a quiet jealousy that often goes unspoken. Not the loud kind, not the obvious kind, but the subtle kind that shows up in silence, in distance, in unnecessary criticism. Because deep down, people recognize something in authenticity that they've lost or hidden. The ability to be consistent without calculation. The ability to speak without editing every word for approval. The ability to exist without constantly managing perception. And seeing that in someone else can feel like a reminder of something forgotten. But authenticity is not trying to win approval or approval's absence. It's not built to be liked or disliked. It doesn't adjust its shape based on reaction. It continues anyway, even when misunderstood, even when misinterpreted, even when it creates tension it never intended to create. And that is what makes it so powerful in a quiet, unsettling way. Because in a world where most people are carefully managing how they are seen, someone who is simply being becomes impossible to fully categorize. They don't fit neatly into expectations. They don't stay predictable in the way people are used to. And unpredictability without performance feels dangerous to systems that rely on control. So authenticity becomes more than just a trait. It becomes a mirror. And mirrors are not always comfortable to stand in front of, especially when they reflect things people were not prepared to see. Especially when they reflect truths that were easier to avoid when everyone else was also pretending. There's a strange kind of silence that follows certain people, not because they speak less, but because their presence changes how everything else feels. Hidden jealousy doesn't always show itself in obvious ways. It doesn't always come as confrontation or open hostility. More often, it appears in small shifts in behavior, in subtle distance, in unexplained coldness, in compliments that feel slightly off, like they were forced through something uncomfortable. It exists quietly, beneath surface interactions, where no one fully admits it, but everyone feels it. When someone carries something undeniable, confidence, authenticity, presence, clarity, it doesn't just attract attention, it also exposes insecurity. And insecurity rarely stays neutral. It reacts, not always loudly, but consistently. People start comparing without meaning to. They begin measuring themselves against someone who may not even be competing. And in that comparison, discomfort is born. Not because the other person did something wrong, but because their existence highlights something unresolved in others. Hidden jealousy is rarely about hate in its purest form. It is often about reflection. It is the moment someone sees what they wish they had, or what they feel they lost, or what they believe they cannot become. And instead of facing that feeling directly, it gets redirected. Sometimes it becomes distance. Sometimes it becomes silence. Sometimes it becomes unnecessary criticism disguised as opinion. But underneath it all, the root remains the same, an internal imbalance that gets triggered by someone else's stability. What makes it even more complex is that it often hides behind normal interactions. People may still smile, still talk, still engage, but something shifts in tone. Energy becomes slightly inconsistent. Support feels conditional. Interest feels selective. It's not always conscious. Many don't even realize they are doing it. They just know they feel something they cannot fully name when they are around a person who carries a strong sense of self. And the person being observed often senses it without being able to prove it. There's a feeling in the air that doesn't match the words being spoken, a disconnect between what is shown and what is felt. That creates confusion because nothing is openly wrong, yet something is clearly not fully aligned. That tension sits quietly in the background of interactions, unspoken but present. In many cases, hidden jealousy reveals itself through exaggeration in the opposite direction. Some people begin to downplay what they see in others. They minimize achievements, question intentions, or try to rationalize someone's presence as luck, timing, or external advantage. Not necessarily because they truly believe it, but because it is easier than confronting the discomfort of comparison. It creates a temporary sense of balance in their mind, even if it is not based on truth. At the same time, there are those who become overly attentive, almost obsessively observant. They watch closely, not out of admiration alone, but out of internal conflict. They try to figure out how someone operates, what makes them different, what creates that effect they cannot ignore. And in doing so, they reveal more about their own internal struggle than about the person they are observing. The most intense part of hidden jealousy is that it often coexists with admiration. Someone can be impressed and unsettled at the same time, drawn in and resistant at the same time, curious and uncomfortable at the same time. That duality creates emotional confusion, and instead of resolving it internally, it often gets expressed outwardly in inconsistent behavior. And yet, from the outside, everything may look normal. Conversations continue. Smiles are exchanged. Words remain polite. But energy tells a different story. It is in the pauses that feel slightly longer than necessary, in the reactions that feel slightly delayed, in the moments where enthusiasm should exist but arrives muted instead. Over time, this pattern becomes part of the dynamic, not spoken, not confirmed, but quietly understood on a deeper level. The person at the center of it may not even be actively doing anything to trigger it. Yet their mere presence continues to activate responses they did not consciously create. And that is what makes hidden jealousy so subtle. It is not about actions, but about perception. Not about behavior, but about what someone represents in the mind of another, often without either side fully acknowledging it directly at some point. Something shifts inside you, and it doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause or some dramatic moment where the world suddenly bows down and reveals your value. No, it starts quietly, almost annoyingly quiet, like a thought you can't fully ignore anymore, a pattern you begin to notice. The way people reacted before versus how they react now. The way certain rooms feel different when you enter them, even when nothing has been said. The way silence around you is no longer empty, but loaded with something unspoken. And the strangest part is you were always there, but you weren't there in your own mind. You were present in body, but absent in recognition. You kept measuring yourself using broken scales, comparing your worth to people who were never built like you in the first place. You kept asking questions that were never meant to define you. Am I enough? Am I interesting? Am I visible? And every time you asked, you handed your power away a little more without realizing it. But awakening to your true worth doesn't come as a compliment from the world. It doesn't arrive through validation. It doesn't get handed to you by someone finally deciding to see you clearly. It begins the moment you stop outsourcing the definition of yourself to people who are just as lost as you were. It begins when you realize that the confusion you felt was never proof of lack. It was just lack of perspective. Because here's the thing they never told you properly. Your worth was never fluctuating. It was never increasing or decreasing based on who stayed or who left, who praised you or who ignored you, who understood you or who misunderstood you. It was constant, but your awareness of it was not. That's where the distortion lived, in perception, in conditioning, in repetition of voices that were never qualified to define something as complex as you. And once that realization starts forming, everything else begins to collapse in a different way. You start noticing how much energy you wasted trying to shrink yourself to fit environments that were never built for your expansion. You start remembering moments where you stayed quiet, not because you had nothing to say, but because you didn't believe your voice deserved space. You start seeing how many times you accepted less, not because you lacked power, but because you forgot it was there. Awakening is not gentle. It doesn't always feel like healing at first. Sometimes it feels like discomfort, because you are meeting yourself without the filters you used to survive. And survival versions of you are often smaller than the truth. They are cautious. They are hesitant. They are designed to avoid rejection, not to express reality. So when you start stepping beyond that version, everything feels slightly unstable at first. People may not recognize it immediately, but they feel it. They feel the shift in your tone, the change in your pauses, the difference in how quickly you apologize for existing, the space you no longer rush to fill just to make others comfortable, the absence of over-explaining, the presence of quiet certainty that doesn't demand agreement to remain valid. And this is where things start to become interesting. Because once you begin recognizing your own worth, the world doesn't suddenly change, but your tolerance for distortion does. You stop negotiating with environments that require you to forget yourself. You stop shrinking just to maintain access. You stop mistaking inconsistency for connection. And slowly, what used to feel acceptable begins to feel foreign. There is a strange clarity that comes with it. Not loud clarity, not aggressive clarity, but something calm and undeniable. You begin to see who is reacting to you and who is actually seeing you, who is projecting onto you, and who is truly present with you. who was comfortable with your silence, and who only engaged with your performance. And then the real shift happens, because awakening to your worth is not about becoming someone new. It is about removing what convinced you that you were less. It is about stripping away the noise, the conditioning, the unnecessary humility that was never humility but self-erasure disguised as politeness. It is about standing in your own presence without translating yourself into something easier for others to digest. And once you start standing there long enough, you begin to notice how differently everything responds. Not because you changed your essence, but because you stopped hiding it. The same people, the same rooms, the same conversations, but now they behave differently around you. Some lean in closer without knowing why. Some step back without being asked. Some try to reconnect with a version of you that is no longer available in the same way. And you start realizing that the version of you thought needed fixing was never broken. It was just buried under expectations, assumptions, fear, repetition, silence, survival habits, and all the things you collected just to be accepted in places that were never meant to hold the full scale of what you are. And now, as you begin to rise into that realization, slowly, carefully, almost like stepping into a memory you forgot you had, everything starts aligning differently. Thoughts becoming clearer, voice becoming steadier, presence becoming heavier, in a way that doesn't ask permission. And the world begins to respond not to who you were pretending to be, but to who you are starting to remember. You have always been beneath it all. And then it starts to feel like there was never any doubt at all, because you were never missing anything except the awareness that you were already